I'm ready to slash and burn.
No quarter. I am going to be uncomfortable and all over you from start to finish.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Outside of the Box. And we're well into the season. Fight nights are getting pretty close to finishing up, and I thought now would be a great time to have Robotic Death Company back on the show to talk about Gigabyte and Cobalt, as Gigabyte has finished up its 4 fight nights. Cobalt still has 1 left to go within the next couple of weeks. So we have lots of stuff to talk about. Welcome back to the show, John, and welcome, Derek.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, so we're going to go way back to the beginning of the season to talk about the Gigabyte matches, and then, get all the way through until this most recent one versus Endgame. So the first one was versus free shipping, and, Gary is a great driver. We all know that about him, and free shipping kind of came with a little bit more power this year with having an active weapon. Derek, this being a first fight as captain, what did you think about that? Was there any worry you're driving against this legendary driver, or did you feel pretty confident about what you were doing going into that?
So before the free shipping fight, what I was most worried about was getting the robot finished, because the robot had not been finished. We safetied, I think, 2 to 3 hours before the actual fight. I was at first a little bit worried about the vertical spinner on free shipping, but then I ran over and I saw it, and I'm like, okay, this can't really actually damage us. We just need to actually get the robot done.
Yes, that is a very important part of the fight, is getting the robot done in the first place. Now, yeah, because I've talked to Gary about it too, and I mean he's acknowledged that weapon is not, it's there, but it's not anything significant. But what do you think really went wrong in that fight?
So we had a few things go wrong. The first big thing was I hadn't set a turn rate limit on my transmitter, which is kind of significant because everyone sets let's say a 60 to 50% limit, because essentially then you have a tiny amount of your stick where you're able to move and not just completely overturn, which was my bad. And also because so Gigabyte, we have to route the power wires on the outside of the internal drive base, which usually works out fine, except this time when we routed it over top, as had previously happened with Gigabyte, we didn't get to notch one of the plates. So plates internally. So every time we hit, the shell kind of deflects a little bit, which is kind of hard to believe, but yeah, it'll deflect a lot, and it actually cut through one of our power wires, which then made our whole frame turn positive, and then that shorted to the motor, which is why we did the whole top thing.
Yeah, and this is something that's happened before with going back with Megabyte. And when you get a configuration and you route wires, you think that's going to work until you test it. And over the testing, you realize that it didn't quite work. So this is because we had such a new configuration and a new design. It's something we didn't anticipate, and it's something that happens. It's happened in the past, and I'm not sure even if I was intimately involved with their updates, and I was more on the outside, maybe I would have seen it, maybe not. Mike was more involved with it, and he didn't catch that. So that's the thing with a new design. You catch these little things that matter, that cost the fight. That being said, though, Original Sin, that's who we're fighting. That's the best, greatest robot that's ever existed. To win these fights, he doesn't need that weapon. That's how good he is. And if you don't have a way to stop him from getting under you, I can't see, even if Gigabyte was perfect, that's a tough fight to win. It's a very tough fight for us. And having the flaw in it, and then the other thing that Derek talked about, it's not that surprising that we lost to such a great you know, a great robot. It's a legend, and it'll always have the best record. You know, when people say, what's the greatest robot? They always say, a Biohazard, right? That's a lot of people say that from the beginning of time, but we destroyed Biohazard when we fought him back at RoboGames. That never happened with Original Sin. I mean, Original Sin is, I think, the best heavyweight robot that's ever existed. So I think his record stands for himself. Now things have evolved in time, and he needs to evolve with it. But you know, to fight that fight, he really didn't need that weapon. I don't think it would have mattered with or without that weapon.
Yeah, Gary's very good at what he does. So always a challenge to fight him. Now, with Cobalt, the first match was versus Death Roll. And I mean, I was very excited for this fight. You know, Death Roll's been away for a couple of years, but back in 2019, they were absolutely one of the robots to beat. Now, you know, the big hitch there is they haven't done a lot with the robot since 2019. It's pretty much the same robot, and everybody else has kind of, you know, changed and leveled up. You know, John, what were your thoughts and like strategy going into that? I mean, is it really just a matter of don't let them hit you with that weapon situation?
Well, you know, the biggest strategy, and Derek and I talked about this quite a bit before that, is we want those piano keys, because me and him designed those. We sat down and spent hours and hours iterating it and designing it. And this is the second, maybe third rev of those. We got to use them at Remars, but this is a better rev. We made some improvements, make it easier to replace, made them better to stick on the ground. And so we wanted those piano keys. We knew if we got under him, we win that fight, right? Because if we go head to head and we don't get under him, his weapon sticks out farther. The thing is when he got up on that wedge, it went up. So we got the first hit every time. And that was a bad fight for him, right? Because of it. He didn't have any way to stop us from getting under him. And actually we knew it was going to go that way if those wedges, if those piano keys worked the way we had hoped they would work. And they did kind of work, even though they were not as good at Remars. If you watch the fight, that was when Matt was driving at Remars. It was pretty similar. I think they're better now. And, you know, we took basically Jake's design. He was nice enough to send me pictures. So we took that and kind of adapted it to us. And, you know, we did our own design, but we got the idea of basically what he did. And he actually even fabricated them for us. So they came out perfect. His fabrication is outstanding. It's like, I'm afraid to use anyone else because of how perfect the stuff comes from him. You know, the shells, all our shells, they come perfectly balanced. They're just, so yeah, I think it really was our advantage ground game. That was that whole fight. And Dave drives amazing. I know they mentioned this in one of the interviews or on BattleBots, but I was slated to drive, and we both went into the test box and we're practicing. And it's like, look at what he's doing. And he's doing these, you know, like burnouts from a car and just missing the edge and getting right to the edge within, you know, inches, going full speed. And that's how he understands the control, and he has the muscle memory that it's going to take me a while to get anything near that. So at that point, and Dave actually said he didn't want to drive. He's like, it's your robot. You need to have the fun. It's like, look, you can reconsider. You know, we can decide now that you can drive this. Really, it's your last time. You should. And so he did. I think he really wanted to. He was just trying to be nice to me. So.
Yeah, I could definitely understand that. But yeah, I mean, that was, you know, definitely a dominant win. And I think, you know, that everybody, I mean, not necessarily that they took notice, because everybody's always known that Cobalt is a very destructive machine. But I mean, it's also Death Roll. So you're fighting against another robot that tends to be very destructive, and being able to dominate them so strongly was very impressive coming out of the gate.
I mean, he's almost impossible to knock out. Death Roll. You know, he's one of the most reliable ones out there. So we did put a beating on him.
Yes. Absolutely. Now going back to Gigabyte, fight number 2 was versus Bloodsport. And this is a robot that everybody knows is a very good horizontal. And I think, probably for them, they were trying to think blade way wise, what's going to be best to go with to combat a full-bodied spinner. Obviously what they did ended up working out and they got the KO. So I just kind of wanted to hear from you, Derek, to kind of take me through that fight.
So we realized with the Bloodsport fight, it was a simple issue of just not breaking, because the way the shell is structured, like sloped AR, it's a giant wedge. They couldn't actually do anything to us. That's also why they picked the blade that they did. They were going for stability rather than reach or impact. And our issue during the fight was I had made the decision to have us put 2 covers over the battery box instead of 1, because I was worried about the big sideways hits causing us to eject our batteries. And what that did was that reduced the amount of thread engagement we had into the actual like magnesium frame. And we didn't realize that the threads don't hold as well in magnesium as they did in aluminum. So when we had that giant hit, the battery box cover ejected, and then the shell caught it, spun it around the whole inside of the robot, and disconnected left side drive, which also has the receiver for the weapon. I mean, our strategy essentially going into it was just get spun up and then go for impacts. And it kind of worked out initially as they flipped Bloodsport over. So the reason why I hit them again was, if you look at the perspective from the actual driver's box, all I could see was the bottom of Bloodsport and all their Patreon people or whatever. And I could see that the drive base is rotating, but what you can't see, which you can see from the opposite angle from the camera, is that they turn and then they reach the top of their mass travel, but they can't go any farther because it's the top of their mass travel, so they can't self-right. So then I hit them again, it self-rights them, and then when we go for the big weapon-to-weapon, we shoot the battery box out. Like, actual damage to the robot was just they scratched the paint on the shell, hitting it for a minute, and the battery box coming out and disconnecting the vest. It was a pretty quick fix, though. We weren't happy about the results of the fight. And we ended up going to like 8 battery box bolts after that, but we have a more permanent solution now.
We actually had that same problem back with Invader in season 2 of the BattleBots, and it was the same exact issue, that backplate, right? I don't think we put one on there. Oh no, we didn't even put a backplate because the box is bolted in with 4 bolts. But what happened is from the shock, those 4 bolts just ripped through the box. It pulled out and it got hit. It got hit by the shell and caused sparks and all kinds of problems in it. So he did put that backplate on, but he explained the issue with that. So it's something, the shocks are so big that the battery box slides in and out. It's designed so that we can take the shell off and slide it out without taking it apart. And yeah, because that should have been an easy fight. We have never lost to a robot like that. I mean, we fought what was the name of that? Brutality, right? Brutality won all the BattleBots until 2009. And the year before that, before that, Megabyte just completely destroyed it. You can find that video. And then when we fought them again, the first time they hit the shell, they almost went upside down, and then they shut it off and fought us as a wedge, and they beat us in a decision because they're not going to spin up, and they spin up at the end and say, "Hey, it's working." So they fought us and beat us a decision. They won the whole thing in 2009. It was a double elimination. We ended up losing the Tombstone also, and again, I think the shock from Tombstone broke a receiver. The receivers back then were not as durable as today. And we take so much shock in Gigabyte, every single hit. And it looked like a huge hit, a shock, in the Bloodsport when we hit the wall, but you watch previous versions of Gigabyte hitting the wall against Hydra, that one, boom, that double bang. I think the old Gigabyte would have beat him easily. I don't think it would have been a match, and this one will when it's reliable. So I mean, that's one rematch we want to do. I think they're going to have to fight us with a wedge. I mean, that's how brutality had to beat us, right? He had to put a wedge on. He couldn't beat us weapon to weapon. Yeah, so that is it was, you know, the growing pains of new design, but without going through those pains, you don't get the improvements that this drivetrain gives us. You know, we have more weight, more speed, more power. Everything about the drive in this is better than any robot I've ever built. I mean, it's even, I think, better than Cobalt's drivetrain and even Cobalt's new drivetrain. It's, you know, the Gigabyte drivetrain is made so that it can do what a pushy bot can do, and that allows us for future upgrades that we could have never done. You know, the weight, and that's why when Derek proposed this change, I was like, you know, we need, if Gigabyte's going to stay relevant, it has to have these improvements, and we have to go through a growing year like this, you know, to enable to get to the next level. I mean, I want to get back to make the final 16 like we did 2 seasons ago, right? That's, and then losing to Tantrum, the guy who wins it all, you know, that, and then same with Cobalt. That season, both of them lost to the guy who won it all. So, which would have been unfortunate if we beat Tantrum, because we would have had to fight each other. That would not have been good. So, but you know, that was such an amazing season for Tantrum, and he's going through the same thing. They made some upgrades, and he's going through the same kind of growing pains. And I think Bloodsport did a little bit too this year.
Yeah.
There's a few teams that did. So, yeah, that's just part of the sport.
That is very true. Now a match that I really want to talk about, because it is probably in my top 3 favorite matches of the season so far, is Cobalt versus Minotaur. I loved everything about it. I mean, just, you know, not just it being a great match, but I mean, like, the excitement and just everything after the match, you know, because obviously, like, you know, that team, you know, you know how, like, how much they've worked to come back and push through after last season, and to have that kind of, like, success, even though you lost the match. You know, it's great that you were able to celebrate in that.
Yeah, that really was an amazing match, and the work and effort we did before the match, because no, we're fighting this legend, and knowing it's not going to be an easy fight no matter what we do. So Sam and Dave had designed these Minotaur forks that are actually in the files, the design files. They say Minotaur forks, but we talked about them. It's like, you know, we have the weight budget to make them bigger. We can make them stick out farther and have them come up. So I spent a whole day calling places, finding the material, while Sam and Dave changed the CAD file. So they're making a CAD file. I'm doing the logistics of how to get this made in Vegas. And, you know, we ended up talking to Jackpot, who's from Vegas, and they gave us a bunch of resources that helped. And that's cool about this whole sport, is everybody helps each other. So we found the source. I went with my van and picked it up, and they had to forklift this big piece of 3/4 inch steel into the back of my van, and then I took it to the water jet place, and they had to forklift it out, you know, because it's a big piece. It was a remnant they had, but it was so big that 3 guys couldn't lift it. And so they took it and put it right to the water jet, and they cut us a whole bunch of these forks that we then, once we got them, we mounted them on there, and that's what those forks were. That when we had those forks on there, we dominated that fight. Once we lost it, then we were losing the exchange. It was toward the end of the fight, but what happened is the brushes on the weapon motor, it's a LEM 170, were old. I didn't have new ones, and they get hot. And every time you hit the ground, it stops, and the motor controller gets hotter, and the heat coming, you know, the motor controller itself also is using more energy because the brushes were not efficient. So you have the stall currents plus the brushes plus the heat, and all that together melted something loose, and that's why we lost the weapon. Now, the weapon, if it's still working, we self-right and we win that fight. And part of my work for the next season is to fix that issue, to not only get better brushes, we're going to higher voltage. So with the same power, if you double the voltage, you get half the current, which means half the heat. So we're gonna have a motor controller that can handle way more power. So we're upping this in multiple levels, right? It's not just one thing, if everything was perfect on the way it was now, that wouldn't have happened, right? But I want it to be such a margin that we can have things that aren't perfect and it still won't happen. So that's kind of what I did over the years with Gigabyte, and it's why we designed our own motor controller. Everyone I could find off the shelf was either too big or was too close to the margin of actually working. So we designed our own that was small, plenty of margin. It'll peak at 7,500 amps. And the stall current's 2,000. The average is probably 200. So you need that amount of margins in this sport to not break, to become reliable, and it takes time. You can't just do it the first time you design. It takes that iteration of finding that weakness and making it stronger. And so that's and we're in that route with Gigabyte too, to make that new drivetrain, which is superior than the old one, to be reliable. And I think the drivetrain proved reliable. It's more of the logistics of the wiring and everything. So yeah, that fight was, we're really friends with Minotaur. So I've known those guys since they first started. When they first started at RoboGames, when Megabyte was actually winning RoboGames, and we never got to fight that whole time. So Gigabyte actually did get to fight Minotaur a few years back. Unfortunately for Gigabyte, they had a problem with their new spin-up controller. One of those, they upgraded something and they're having that pains of getting the spin up right, so they didn't have a very good spin up in that fight, and we won a decision. So that was a feather in our cap to beat such a legendary. But this fight, both robots were at 100%, right? That's what if you watch that fight with Gigabyte, they weren't at 100%, so it's not as great of a fight. This one is a much better fight, even though we lost, because both robots were really at the peak of their game during that fight. So that was, amazing fight. And you can see Dave was happy in the interview, right? And we lose, and you can see, that's the kind of way you want it. If you're going to lose a fight, that's the loss you want to do.
Yes, absolutely. Now, let's talk about the win that Gigabyte had versus Starchild. Now, I'll admit I wasn't exactly sure how that was going to go. But that was, it was, I've said this before, but it's very much like a death by 1,000 cuts. It was just take a piece off here, take a piece off there, and you kept, doing passes. It was very impressive that they were still moving around for that whole time. But I mean, was that, once you kind of could see that was working and you were getting these pieces off of them, was that just the strategy for the rest of the match? Just keep making those passes?
Yeah, so going into the match, we had the configuration that John had cooked up years ago to fight Huge again. We weren't sure if it would work, and also we were kind of concerned about the fragility of it, which turned out to be a valid concern. But we did know a few things, namely the height of the spokes on Starchild. Actually, let me grab a piece of Starchild.
Oh my.
So if you actually look at this piece, this height, this would be ground level, and then this is the inside of the spoke. We knew we were hitting inside of the spoke here. So that was a big kind of concern where I was like, okay, we just need to hit them hard with a lot of speed, and then we can kind of hook into the whole wheel. Then the other thing was, I knew that the wheels were held together, if you look here, with just small pop rivets. And I knew that wasn't quite as durable as what you want in a situation like that. So I knew just as long as we could stay spinning and try and use those add-on teeth for as long as we could and just hit them really hard, that we could win the match. I also knew I was a bit worried about their top attack system, but I also knew that if they missed, then they would go weapon to weapon with the shell, which I knew we could win because it's 120 pounds. So yeah, it was a great match because they're a good opponent. It really let us stretch the legs of the drivetrain, though we still had the usual torque steer issues, which we're hoping to resolve next year with the robot. And overall, I think it was a good win for us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was the first win for Derek and his team. That was really amazing. And the driving, I think Derek did a great job driving that, and he's able to drive fast and stay away from the walls. It's getting, you can see him maturing and getting better with each fight. And that's what I was hoping when I had, when he became a part of the team, and then he wanted to drive. So I was really happy with his progression over time. And actually, he's been a bigger help with the design changes, to have somebody to sit with me and go over what I'm doing. And then I haven't been as helpful to him because, I just don't have the time. But he has some people that's helping him. And I have to decide which one to spend a majority of my time on. So. Yeah, I think that went well, and I think my idea with I made 2 of these big blades, right, and we chose one for this fight, and Chewy, he's the one that actually welded it in place and got it prepared. The shell we're using was a shell that was totally destroyed by Witch Doctor. I mean, if you looked at that shell, Wachi said we can't fix that. But Carl Lewis, the original member with Megabyte, the original designer of Megabyte, he took that shell and used a big giant press and heat, and I don't know how he did it, but he made a shell out of it. He cut off the mounts for the blades, and he welded an AR-500 blade to the AR-500 shell up halfway through, which did, if you watch that fight, it did some damage. Then the piece that was mounted to the top, it's like a top hat with a blade. When it was welded, Chewy welded it right at the seam of the blade, and that softened it. And that's why those things started going up. They started bending up, and they broke off eventually. So the second one I have, which I made again 3 years ago, we're going to take it and weld it to that shell ahead of time, and not weld it there, and then put reinforcements right where it broke. So so we'll be ready with the shell. We won't have to do it at the event in case we fight them or huge, again. So we'll be prepared ahead of time. And I think that's the biggest improvement we're going to have for the new Gigabyte is they're going to come with it ready to go through safety, which is how it's always been when I ran Gigabyte. We came, we unloaded the truck, went to safety, then we just unloaded the robot from the truck and went straight to safety. We left everything in the truck to get through safety so that we're done. And we're done for 2 or 3 days. That it's so much more relaxing when you don't have to keep building. And those poor guys were stressed out. Cobalt was ready for safety the first day, so that we got both robots through safety, and they were so stressed out. And so that we're just gonna make sure we come prepared. Both robots get through safety. They're both there 2 days now to think, to contemplate, to check everything. They had like an hour to do that. That's not enough time. And it's amazing they did as good as they did to wait to that last minute. You got to come prepared to be able to make it to that 32. You can't just show up and prepare when you get there.
Yeah, for sure. Now let's talk about Cobalt's judge's decision win versus Overhaul. I'll admit, Overhaul has definitely looked better this year than what I've normally seen. I think, Charles really started to figure some things out, but I still expected it to be a knockout. And Charles was really able to hang in there, which was great. But you still were able to get the win in that match. What did you think about the way that went?
It didn't go quite the way I thought. I really thought we'd knock him out too. I thought it was going to be a complete massacre, but he's a tough robot. And we won that ground game too. So that's another thing is he doesn't have a weapon and he can't win the ground game. It's not a good fight for him. And for him to do as well as he did, it was really impressive. He builds a really tough robot. I think he's an amazing builder. So I've always liked his stuff. I know he hates vertical spinners. He doesn't. you know, what can I say about that? I love vertical spinners, and that's why I acquired Cobalt. I knew it would take me 3 to 4 years to make something as good as Cobalt. Those Sam and Dave did such a good job in iterating from their first design to the next and making it better. So, yeah, I like Charles, and I don't, I don't know how to react to his hate of vertical spinners. He made some remarks that they weren't mean; they were like tongue in cheek. But you can tell he doesn't like these big weapon robots. He wants all pushy robots and lifters, which you need a variety of robots to have an exciting event, and he has to figure out how to deal with the other types of robots. Just like Gigabyte has to figure out how to deal with wedges. If it doesn't, it can never go much farther than, we made the final 16, but we have to figure that out. And maybe we do, maybe we don't, but you got to try. And he needs to do the same kind of thing. He needs to figure out how to fight other kind of robots. We can't have everybody having a vertical spinner. You have everybody that looks like Endgame or Byte Force or Cobalt. You don't want the whole thing to be like that. And that's what I love about Bloodsport too, right? He's a unique robot, and he does so well with what he has. He's able to figure out, and he does have that speed of driving that Derek did with Gigabyte. That speed and ability and the driving, it gives him more chances to win that fight. And I think that's why he's been so successful. And we need to step it up with Gigabyte like that, which is hopefully will happen within the next season or two at the most. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of Endgame, so the last match, versus Gigabyte, I mean, I know I've seen it many times this season where a team has a match that, didn't necessarily go the way that they wanted to, and then it kind of feels like they just take that frustration out on a future opponent. And I think Endgame wanted to make a statement in that match. They definitely did. And Derek, I'm just curious to get your thoughts as that was happening. Were you just like, I need to just stay away from their weapon as much as possible, or what? How did that end up going for you?
So before the fight, we were like, okay, we just fought Star Child. It was a good win, but then we had to fight Endgame. And we knew we win that. If we win that, we get into the round of 32, no problem. If we lose that, it's probably not. So a few factors going into it was, we knew that we can actually do 3 minutes with the robots now. That was pretty nice. But we had to essentially pull out all the stops when it came to adding extra stuff on to give us an edge. Like we finally managed to have time to fit the spatula. We had a kind of temporary magnet set up, which we hadn't run before, mainly because the magnets that were chosen were completely incorrect. Basically, case magnets of this type, which we had, you can't actually run your magnets, let's say, flat on the ground, or else you just magnet yourself to the ground and lose. But cased magnets, they have a larger drop-off over distance than a traditional uncased magnet. So we didn't run them. We kind of got a rig for them. I'm not really sure they made a difference. And we also did a few things like we had to go to 4 batteries instead of 6 to make weight for all of this. And then we ran the flat shell, which we added Tegris to for more armor. We had to also go with the 90-degree mast, as I call it, due to the machine bit, which we're retiring after this. It's too fragile. And basically, we did all that. And the tactic going into it for me was just keep the spatula pointed and give us room and time to spin up using that. And the biggest issue is simply like the spatula, if you watch on the slow motion and so on, it's simply disintegrated. That version of the spatula just couldn't hold up to anything really. And it looked like it even deformed just hitting one of the kill saw slots, which is not good because it's just like polycarb. So yeah, I mean, I think they did the right move with the shell spinners, just like keep on them until it's over, especially like the mass immediately fell off. And that combined with our suboptimal LED setup meant that once we landed back down, you couldn't really tell which way the robot was spinning, and then they flipped us and it was over. Obviously, you even though the drive base was spinning down, they didn't hit us again, as you're supposed to. Yeah, that was the end of the match.
Yeah. Did you have any thoughts on it, John?
Well, to beat that robot, we knew we needed a fork mechanism, the kind that we used against Tantrum, and Tantrum. I mean, he's a San Diego guy, so we talk all the time, and he thought it made a big difference. It made their driver tentative because he knew that he'd just go right up into the shell, so he didn't want to do that. So it was made to break off, but it was made to last a bit, and it was actually a lot easier to put together and a lot easier to get going. With this new design, just was a cluster. It was hard to put together. It didn't work, and I didn't like it, but I don't know everything, and I let some people do decisions. Sometimes it works well. I think a lot of Derek's, it's been really helpful for the team. Other people, not so much. It was sort of disastrous. And so that is just something, as a team, and letting other people have a part in it, it's what happens. You make wrong decisions, but that is something we have to get. We have to get that to work in order to move to the next level. I think we now have the drivetrain that will make that work. And then we got to decide, and Derek and I is going to be working on this in the future here, how best to do that. We got a little more experience from the Cobalt forks, but it's not really applied the same way. It's not exactly the same thing. We know when people fight us what they're going to put on there 100% with Gigabyte. We don't know that with Cobalt. So, but with Gigabyte, we know they're going to put a big wedge. They have to, because to handle that hit, that's all it takes. And, it was Matt Maxim that proved that back years ago after fighting us over and over and over. He kept changing things, and he kept getting a different angle on the wedge. He's shock mounted. He went to bigger chains. He had like 4 iterations of chains before they stopped breaking. And he got to the point where he beat us every time. Even if we'd go in the losers round and knock everyone out and face him again, he beat us in the finals. And it got to be a habit of him beating us. That was one of his feathers in his cap. So yeah, so that was unfortunate. And the chances of us beating in game, even if we have a perfect fork and everything goes perfect, is very small. It's I'd be happy if someone thought we'd win 1 out of 10 with everything perfect. Everything wasn't perfect here. So yeah, in game he's the apex predator in the sport. Yeah, and so when he loses, it's a shock to everyone. And he's very liked. So even though when he loses, people are happy because everyone's the underdog. Everyone he fights, so people like to see the underdog, win a fight. But yeah, they're very honorable guys, and he told me, he actually asked me before the fight about Derek. I'm like, oh, he's a good kid. He's not cocky. He's not. He goes, okay, well, we're not going to, do that extra step. I don't know if he said that before or after the fight, but I'm pretty sure it was before, because he didn't go and hit him again. He knew the fight was over. He did the honorable thing, unlike Riptide, when Riptide fought Shredderator and he was upside down. The fight was over, and he just kept hitting him. So yeah, I got to give him, credit for not destroying more than he could have.
Yes, that is very true. Now Cobalt has one more fight left versus Lucky. And I know that I talked to Mark and Matt, and I mean, Lucky is my first thought was, oh no, because I just think of Cobalt and I think of all the destruction that Cobalt's done. But I mean, Matt Olson is a really fantastic driver. And I think that's probably the most dangerous thing about fighting that robot. Just kind of tell me what your thoughts were when you saw Lucky on the schedule, as far as, what you would need to do against them.
Yeah, I've been actually saying for years that Lucky's one of the most underrated robots out there. And a few years back, Mark, I've known Mark forever, going back to the early to mid 2000s. And he had a dominant super heavyweight at one time. And the first time Super Megabyte fought him, we won because we knocked his wedge off. But once he hardened that, nobody beat him. He hardened that wedge and he was unbeatable. And it was just like Lucky. It's a super heavyweight version of Lucky that was just a dominant robot. And then it was a few years ago that he asked me if I wanted to take Lucky and run it in RoboGames. This was like right after a BattleBots event. And so me and a teammate, he brought it to my house. So it's in my garage in Escondido, and we take this apart, and I made some minor changes. He used some terminal screws and I soldered those, and we put this together. We go to RoboGames and we take third place. We almost beat Minotaur. We're kicking his ass that whole fight with Lucky. And my teammate was driving, a great driver. You got a great driver on Lucky, and it's just amazing. And at one point he was getting counted out. It's not called Minotaur though. It's called
Taurus Maximus.
Yeah, Taurus Maximus. He's stuck up on the flat side and he's getting counted out, and we're cheering. And all of a sudden he modulates his thing and flips over. It's like, oh crap. And then he gets a huge hit on Lucky. Just this, with basically seconds to go, and we were crippled. And if that fight lasts 10 more seconds, it's over. We're destroyed. So we lose the decision, but it was a very close decision. But a lot of people thought we still won that fight because we won most of that fight. So so I had some experience with Lucky. It's a great robot, and they have that great driver now, Matt. So I was a little worried, but I knew we had to get under him. If he gets under us, he wins that fight. He gets us over and over. Then what happens to Cobalt is what happened in the Minotaur fight, because we go over and you get that extra heat every time you hit the ground to self-right. You get that stall current of the limb, which is like 2,000 amps, and you keep getting 2,000 amps every time you stop the motor. It gets hotter and hotter, and bad things happen. So so going into that fight, I think having the mechanism to get under him was the key to winning that fight.
Yes, for sure. Now I'm really curious, like obviously there's more season to go, because even after the fourth fight, obviously based on record, I think that it's likely to see Cobalt in the round of 32. Moving ahead though from World Championship VII and looking at World Championship VIII, what are you working on with both Gigabyte and Cobalt to improve both of those robots for the next season?
You can talk about Gigabyte.
Okay, so for Gigabyte, change 0 is be ready, which is why we got parts hopefully getting done now. John, you gotta whip out that water cooled credit card.
Yeah, I gotta pay the half up front to get those parts made.
Yeah. And then change 1 is have it be a lot easier to work on. There were a lot of issues with servicing the robot. One of the main reasons why we didn't run it at RoboGames was because we were registered right until the end for RoboGames. Was we technically had a Gigabyte ready. I just was not going to touch last year's Gigabyte and try and turn it around in the RoboGames time because of all the issues with maintenance. And one of my goals for the future Gigabyte is I want to be able to make that kind of 1 hour so on turnaround time, not just so I can go to RoboGames or similar, but also so I can just have a fun experience at BattleBots. Just go in safety, have a good time. And then big changes we're hoping for is we have a magnet system designed and parts getting ordered for it right now. We have the magnets. We're looking to be able to oscillate from 70 to about 130 pounds of downforce. We're going to be testing that actually at the live show Proving Grounds, July 5th through 9th. Invitation to any teams who are interested in fighting Gigabyte. We will be there. It's scheduled. Just talk to Greg. We want more robots to fight. We're currently slated to fight Doom and Jackpot. And final set of changes is by the end of our season, the batteries were really sad on Gigabyte. Like they were just at the end of their lives. And I think John had those batteries since Invader? Around that time.
Some of those were really old batteries, and from our first sponsor, we got the new BattleBots from Max Amps. Yeah, so some of those were really old, and they're heavy.
Well, there's no stopping the batteries from being heavy, but we found out.
Thinking of the older batteries yet. Now these are way better than the older NiCads that we used to use. That's right. We had to have 12 of those.
Yeah, so after the end game fight and some further testing, we found Gigabyte actually works on 4 batteries because originally it was separate voltage for the drive and the spin up, which meant we had to have a separate battery set. And it became a combined 6 battery set instead of 4 for spin up, 2 for the drive. And we realized, okay, that works, but our batteries are worn out. So we're going from 14S, so about like 52 volts, to 16S, because we're getting new batteries anyways, which is another like 10 volts ish total, nominal. And what that gets us is we go back to our old tip speed we had on the E-Tech, so season 5 and before, which is 230 miles an hour. My guess is we'll tack about 220. The drive becomes even a little bit faster. And on the 4 battery setup, we get a bit more watt hours. So we know for a fact we can do 3 minutes with that new battery setup. And hopefully we're going to refine the spatula, that's for sure. But I'm hoping to maybe get a composite sponsor. If you do composites, contact us, please, to do a carbon fiber version of the spatula, because that kind of flat plate is kind of perfect for a carbon fiber piece. Or if not, just go back to more of the older, just welded, simple fork setup from season 6 and before for the spatula.
Yeah, we do got to find the right material for that spatula.
Oh yeah.
And I had used a 4130, I think. I wanted to use 4140, but I couldn't find it in the plate that I wanted.
I
So-
think AR is the move for that, because especially with Senket Sen now.
Yeah. That the thing is, it doesn't break, right? But the bolts will break.
Yeah.
I wanted something to break off for when it's getting just flying across the arena and it gets bent or something, you're not stuck. And that's how the previous one did kind of work. It did break off when as opposed
The
to
new version of the bolt still broke. It's everything else broke too before that, which was not the move.
Oh yeah, on the new version, yeah, everything broke there. Right. Yeah, I get that.
But yeah, those are the changes slated for Gigabyte.
We're gonna go back and iterate the original one, the one that we used on Tantrum.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that should help.
Yeah, those are the changes we have slated. As I said, please, any prospective teams, we are scheduled. Talk to Greg Munson. I would totally like to fight whoever brings whatever. On to you, John, for Cobalt.
So yeah, when he's saying to make it serviceable, historically though, Gigabyte's so much more serviceable than Cobalt. You take the shell off and you're wide open. You get everything. You take the top plate and now it's just all the stuff laid out on your bench. It's so easy to deal with. Now they made some changes that made it a little harder to deal with, but that's what he's correcting this year to make it back to the way it was. Now Cobalt, on the other hand, is very hard to deal with. To get to some of the electronics, you've got to take a whole bunch of stuff out to get to them, and to even service them, you've got to go in there blindly and try to figure out how to take it out. So you got to practice to be able to do it in any time. So the new design is using a new motor, which is much smaller with the same amount of power. So we're going to a brushless motor on the drive, and I do have the gearbox. So this gearbox is the one originally in Cobalt that Sam and Dave designed. Very sturdy, amazing gearbox. It's mounted, shock mounted. It's just perfect. And then Chewy went and designed this mechanism to hold the motor. And this motor is the motor that's part of Hyperdrive. It's a Hypershock. And then he also has the motor controller that they kind of sell as together. They also have a gearbox, but we liked our gearbox better than theirs. So this is designed now. The other motor was like this long and thicker. And now the electronics can mount right on top, and they're mounted either wedged between things here or up in the front where you can't reach. So everything will be out in the open. You take that top off and this is right what you get to. So the servicing of this will be a lot easier, and the turnaround to get the fight will be a lot easier. So hopefully we won't have any of the little bugs that you get when you go to a new system, and we test this enough so that I know people have used this. Chewy actually used this motor at RoboGames, and it worked fine for him. He had one little thing to improve on this. So
well, he's not sure if there's a little thing to improve because he thinks that motor may have been directly struck by a vertical spinner.
Well, he did say it was struck and it still worked.
Yeah.
After it got struck.
Yeah.
So that's a big deal.
Yeah. Chewie put it in his usual joke bot, and he just about touched the ceiling against Terratops. Actually, he did touch the ceiling about twice, because the bot weighed about 100 pounds.
Really?
Yeah,
So he's saying that he left this space here so that he could make an improvement to it, but if we
it's
don't
like,
use
yeah, an
that-
additional like can, like help stabilize the Outrunner can a little bit.
Yeah, this is, so this will be mounted here, so this is so much smaller, less weight, so it gives us about 8 to 10 pounds, which is a big deal. It makes it more serviceable. We go to we're changing the LEM, the armature on the LEM to be, instead of a 24-volt armature, it'll be a 48-volt armature, which means for the same exact power torque, you got half the current, so that helps that whole heat issue problem. And then I'm going to make sure I have plenty of spare brushes that we can just replace. It's the same brushes for Gigabyte. We just modified the brush housing itself, so the housing is not the same. It is the same. It was the same until we modified it, so we had to modify that to fit it in Gigabyte. So no modifications on that motor other than replacing an armature and making sure we have new new brushes in case we need them. So we're going to have a little bit more spares. So that's main. And we're also going to 16S instead of, we were at 7S before. So going to 16S means we're much faster. We use less current because the higher the power, to get the same, higher the voltage with the same power, it's less current. Power is basically voltage times current, and by having a higher voltage, you have lower current to get the same power. And that, the heat is your enemy in BattleBots. And some robots like Uppercut, they were using 100 and something volts. I mean, they had a system using such a high voltage that they had so low current and low heat in their robot. It was, those MIT kids are really smart. But I'm not sure that's even legal today, because they made some rules about the high voltage. There's always more danger with high voltage as far as getting shocked. But
Yeah,
there's advantages and disadvantages to everything.
I think they have the battery limit now at like 18S, like 16S essentially, but 18S if you ask really nicely. Because Ripperoni's running like the kind of the uppercut tech, but on 18S, and then Ribot's on a similar system also, but down to 18S now.
Yeah, that I remember before they had a limit, but they'd say, if you know what you're doing, and we know you know what you're doing, we'll let you do it. It was something like that. So electrical engineer, they would have let me do it, because that's what I do I'm a consultant. I design circuits for a living, but they don't want like someone who doesn't have any background in it to do it, because it could be dangerous.
Yes, and safety is very important. So yeah.
And it's always been that way with BattleBots. They always really cared about safety. So.
Oh yeah, for sure. We don't need anybody getting hurt by robots. That's why the robots fight each other. So
it would be a disaster for the sport too.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. But yeah, no, that's great. I think that's awesome. And I mean, like all of the robots keep improving every season, and I think that's why the sport gets better and better, because you just see like such a high level of competition. This season's been great. I think next season has the potential to be even better. So yeah, I think a lot of fans are going to be excited to see what you have to bring. One last thing, because I've been doing this with every team recently, so I want to make sure that I do. Please feel free to thank any sponsors for Gigabyte and Cobalt, to give them some love.
Okay, so I'm gonna just take this from my memory, but we have a local sponsor here that's been a big help. He has the skills that I don't have, and it's CTW, which stands for
Custom Tube Works.
Custom Tube Works. They're here in Vista, really close. And right now they're doing some mods and upgrades to Cobalt for me. So they have skills that, I can do this stuff, but I won't do it as good as Junior can do it. That the owner, him, it's a family business too. It's a husband and wife and kids, and they're just such great people. And the ability he has to, well, he does the tubes, our self-righting tube. The first time we ever had a tube that didn't break, it got hit by a weapon and it bent. So, and you know, his welding ability. So that's just comes to mind because I've been talking to them, and I was over at his shop just a few days ago. And then Max Amp's been our oldest sponsor. You know, I did a lot of research to pick their batteries back in 2017 for Invader, and they just kept on, and they do the stickers for us and provide us with batteries. And Send Cut Send is actually it's amazing how cheap they are. I don't know if you need anything cut, they have the material, they can get it done in such a reasonable time, and the quality is amazing. So that's another one. And then we had a sponsor was now is Exometry, but that it was what was the name of them before Exometry bought them? Derek,
The
our sponsor from last
ESMI?
year. What's that?
ESMI?
No, I didn't get the ESMI. They did machining and stuff.
Is it like Wiley Coyote machine or whatever?
No, that's Brent's.
Yeah, that's Brent. I don't remember what last year's
So
was
Exometry.
on.
So last year they were Exometry bought. God, I have all their stickers and everything. You know, they came and took pictures with us.
I don't remember.
And I wish I would have been ready, but they were over on the East Coast. I know they did even work for Waiachi.
Oh, Big Blue Saw, right?
That's it. So Big Blue Saw, they have very high quality, and Exometry bought them. So that was another really good sponsor we had. Then Wiley Coyote is the machine shop that Brent Riker, the teammate who has cancer or has been fighting cancer, and he does amazing work. He's doing a bunch of Gigabyte parts for us right now, and plus he's a team member. And then the other one you mentioned was ESMI. They built our motor controllers, the ones that we designed and were building by hand. So they built a whole bunch of those for us as a sponsorship. So they're a company I've been using for 25 years as a consultant. Many of the companies I go through use ESMI. Actually, I'm at a company Interflight now, and they use ESMI for a lot of their rework and building up prototypes and things like that. It's a family-owned business. Tony Kim is the son of the original owner, but that's passed down to the family, and it's amazing place. They're really great people, you know, they're great families. And so for the robot and for my professional work, they've done tons of stuff. And I taught a class in my daughter's elementary school on building robots, and we did a field trip to ESMI. They have all these pick and place machines, you know, the robotics. So he took the whole class and showed them the pick and place and the little robotic arms picking up the chips with a vacuum and putting them on the part, you know, placing them on the boards. And it's going so fast. And so the kids were so fascinated with that presentation he gave us. That was pretty cool that he did all that just for the kids. So yeah, did I miss any sponsors?
Fusion Filaments.
Oh yeah, those. I don't know if you guys, if you know anything about Fusion Filaments, but where did I put it? They provide with this amazing. I got a gold one but they do these colors and these PLA that are just amazing. And the PLA is tougher than normal PLA. Plus, they have this variety of colors. They have a gold one that I had sitting up. I was going to use it, so I put it in the heater to dry it out. Yeah. So it comes out like gold. It's such an amazing thing. So I'm about to print some stuff with it. So I had it. I haven't used this in a long time, so I had to dry it out in the dryer. That's where it was in. So I think that covers all our sponsors. So I hope this didn't
Awesome.
take too much time.
No, you're fine. But
Oh.
yeah, no, that's I've been trying to do that because sponsors are important. I don't know that any team could really do it without the sponsors. So gotta give them a shout out. But
Yeah, I'm
yeah.
glad you did that, and I'm sure it'll make them happy. I'm going to make sure to tell them, like, watch that because we talk about you. You'll get more people to watch your stuff then.
Exactly. But
They'll probably forward fast to the end though, just to
yeah, just
you know.
go to the end, see the sponsor stuff at the end. But yeah, so well, we have a little bit left of the season, going to be very exciting. And so yeah, obviously anybody that's watching, keep watching the show. There will be more interviews, more recaps, more whatever else I can come up with. So lots more robotic content. Make sure that if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, like, share, comment, all of those good things. And we will see everybody next time on the show.
All right, thanks.